Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hack Shack. Today we're going to push it to the limit. Limit! So a good friend of mine has asked me to build him a table, and the crux of the brief was it needs to be long. So it looks like we're going to need a bigger shack. So I figured if I open up the doors and then attach doors onto those doors, doorception, I'll gain about 2 extra feet, which should be enough to get a roughly 14.5, 15 foot table. Now the extra bit of length is all well and good, chortle, but in order to keep off the illustrious British weather, I'm just going to knock up a makeshift roof. There you go, all done. Part 1 of this project. Now the next challenge was having something to build the table on. So obviously my tiny little hack bench is nowhere near big enough for something this big. So I'm going to make some stands and a base. Now these stands certainly won't win any beauty awards, but they're really strong and surprisingly level. Now with the stands made, it's time to clear some space in the shack. Rossy, it's time to move out. Now I can't make the table any wider than the door, otherwise there's no chance of me getting to work on it or getting it out. So the main thing that was needed was a kind of runway all the way down the shack, move the bench out of the way and have a nice clear space to build on. So now there's room to lay out these stands and I can start building a makeshift table in order to build the actual table on. Now this will be the reference point for the flattening sled, and so everything basically relies on this being nice and straight. So I just want to make sure you use the right 2x4s with as little bend as possible. Then some cross pieces for strength, and then just make sure that it's all square, and then I can flip it over and screw them together. Again, this is the reference point for the whole build, so I just want to make sure that everything's as level as possible as I go. Right, and now I know how much space I've got to work with, I can go and source some timber. So this is Scawton Sawmill in Thirsk in North Yorkshire, and Randle's told me all about this when I asked him if he could source me some timber for this table. And the guys here are really helpful, the prices were great, and they had exactly what I needed. So I took the timber home for the frame, and then they were going to deliver the actual slabs the day after. So once I know the size of the slabs that I've got, I can go and design the table to meet those specifications. So by the time I've trimmed up the ends, it'll be about 14 feet long, and the slabs themselves are 18mm at the moment, which is just over 3 inches. Now in order to get a table that's about 3 feet wide, I'm going to have to join the 2 slabs together. Now the 2 slabs are actually from the same tree, and you could join them like this. However, what I'm going to do is actually flip them over and join them this way, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that the grain is going in 2 different directions, so it's much more stable, and also the grain will be book matched where it opens up. And then I just want to make sure, given the kind of average seating height, then we can work out how long to make the legs. I'm going to put these on an angle. It doesn't really matter, it's arbitrary, but I've kind of gone for 11.25, which sounds really specific, but it's just because it's half of 90 degrees. And then given how much room you want, if you're sitting at the end of the table, we can work out how long the stretcher can be at the bottom. Now a lot of the farmhouse tables you see have these diagonal stretchers, and that's to stop racking, so if somebody pushes on the side it stops it from tilting back and forth. I'm not too bothered about that. I'm more bothered about it bowing in the middle, so I want my supports to actually be the other way up, because then the wood will be under compression and not under tension. So now it's a case of addressing these slabs, and this was one of many times of taking the slabs out, swapping them over, flipping them over. I've got a pretty good workout building this table. I mean, each of these slabs is over 200 kilos each, so I figured I needed something to give me a hand, especially as the table is going to be joined together and it's going to be twice as heavy. So I'm just welding up a support that I can hang a winch from. Pro tip, if you're ever welding something up high or above your head, make sure you've got hearing protection on, because those little sparks can get anywhere. Now it's a lot easier to flip the slabs. I can address flattening them. As you can see, it's not actually bowed, it's just the bottom of this slab has a lot more meat on it. So if I can take that off first and then flip it over, it'll be a lot flatter. However, it's just a little bit too high for the sled to slide on, so I've just got to take off a couple of mil in that high spot there. Now to take off most of this meat, I'm going to be building a simple router sled. It really is just a sheet of plywood with a couple of runners made out of 1x2s. I mean, given this and the crappy construction timber that I've built the table from, I'm under no illusions that this is going to give me a really smooth, perfect finish. It's more just to rough out the final dimensions. Now this is only a 1/4 inch collet router, so I can only get a certain width bit, which means more passes, but the passes are quicker and easier, so it probably works out in the long run. It's as simple as that. Just slide the router back and forth all the way down the table, flip it over, rinse and repeat. Oh yeah, and there's the other slab to do as well. Once it's flat, it means I can take off one of the edges, because now I've got parallel sides. So as I cut through, it's going to be a roughly clean 90, which will make it easier to join. However, I do know how difficult rip cuts can be, especially in 3-inch oak that's best part of 5 meters long. And so I've put a new rip saw blade on the circular saw. So my circular saw does only have a depth of 55 mil, so I've just got to finish the rest off with a handsaw. Again, much needed workout, but a little bit of wax on the blade helps it glide through. So just taking that edge off does actually make it easier to manoeuvre it as well, and then I can concentrate on doing the same with the other slab. So the circular saw and my shonky handsaw skills have not left the smoothest joint. So I'm just running a router down to get something really flat. Don't have a router bit that's over 3 inches long, so I've got to attack from the other side using a trim router bit. And now while the slab is still in 2 pieces, I thought it was perfect time to attack the live edge. So all the bark is off, this is just kind of like the fibres underneath, and I still want some texture, but I just want to make sure there's no rough edges and anything you can catch your clothes on or anything like that. So with the bulk of the material moved, it was high time for a clean-up. I got 10 full bin bags of sawdust and shavings off that. Now that the slabs are flattened, I can actually flip the base over, and that will give me more width, and I can finish off the table on the other side of the base. So this is the first time seeing the 2 slabs together. This is actually the underside. As you can see, the grain doesn't match. And now I'm just going along the join and seeing where I can refine it, and I'll do that with a hand plane. Thanks to Brain Fizz for the sharpening tips and for the super secret sharpening compound. That mirror edge. A big nice long joiner plane would be perfect for something like this, but the jack plane's fine for just kind of taking off those high spots. Now as you can see, clamps have trouble gripping onto the live edge, so I'm going to make some little jigs to clamp onto. So this is just some scraps of wood, and I'm going to put a little spacer in between, and then there's going to be adhesive grip tape, and that will give some purchase for when I put the sash clamps on. Now these are for some vertical clamping pressure all the way down. And I'm just putting some like greaseproof paper on to make sure that any glue spill out doesn't stick to it. And I'm just doing a dry run first just to see how long it actually takes to glue up something this size. And it is true what they say, with a glue up this big you really never can have too many What do you mean? Oh, I don't even think the fishmongers is open this time of day. So there's no going back from this point, both in terms of gluing the two slabs together, but also there will be no way of getting into the shack because there's a great big table in the way. And I really am glad I did that dry run of the glue up, just because I knew the kind of procedure of getting from one end to the other, which bits I need to clamp in which order. And then I left it a good 24 hours until I could come and take the clamps off. Now again, this is the underside, and I deliberately glued it up this way so that the base would be flat, and I would have less work to do on the top. And once it's flipped over, this is the top, and you can see that grain kind of mirroring where the join is. Now there are a couple of bits along the join where I actually knocked it and compressed some of the grain, so I've not gone completely mad. I'm just using the steam to expand the fibres again and fill in those gaps. Now there's probably a reason I've not seen anyone do this before, but it worked for me. Now this was the ultimate test to see if the table would hold together and if the winch would hold the weight, and it did fine, no problem. Now, obviously, don't do that. This thing here weighs at least 4 times what I do. So if I slip and I fall and that thing crushes me, there'll be no more tables, there'll be no more cutscenes or green screen or stupid movie references, there'll be no more Hack Shack. So stay safe and stay hydrated. Now that the top is done, we can start on the base. So this lovely old aged beam is like an 8x4, and I'm going to use that as the main stretcher on the bottom of the base. It took a bit of work getting off all the outside and down to some nice wood, but it has a beautiful character, and it already had this really nice chamfer along the edge, which I just brought back with a spoke shave. And then same for the legs, it's these 6x6 air dried oak beams, and I'm just cutting them to the right length and the right angle. And the last bit we need is the supports along the top of the table which connect the slabs to the base. You can make this out of the offcuts from the slabs themselves. Now the reason I just want to get all these big pieces cut is because as soon as I start on finishing the top, I won't be able to come in the shack anymore. So with that out of the way, it's time to make a start on getting a really nice finish on these slabs. Now you all know the drill, work your way through the grits until you get down to a finish that you like. And then I'm just putting a small round over on the top and bottom of both ends of the table. Now from here I couldn't actually get in anymore, so I had to build this little glamorous cardboard runway, and that meant I could get the top really nice and clean and ready for finish. This feature here is my favourite part of the table, and there's actually 2 of them because it's mirrored. Now because this is going outside, I'm actually going for yacht varnish. So I'm doing 3 coats of gloss yacht varnish first, because that's got all the UV protection. And then knock that down with sandpaper for the final 2 coats of matte, which really flatten it down. It looks beautiful. However, that process took approximately a week because it was 24 hours cure time between each coat, 5 coats, do the maths. So I had to actually construct the base in the house. So it's not Al's hack shack anymore, it's Al's hack living room. I've never made a mortise and tenon before, or a bridle joint, or anything beyond a half lap really. And what was nice is that with each joint I made, I kind of got more and more practice and more competent. And as I was saying back when we were looking at the designs, I didn't really want to take measurements. It was more just about offering each piece up to each other and then marking them as we go. It seemed like a lot more accurate way to do it. So for the mortises, I just got a really nice edge with a chisel and then ground out most of the meat with a router and then went back in and cleaned it up with a chisel again. This one's a little bit too tight, so again, just a little bit of fine tuning until it's a nice snug fit. Now, in order to make all the mortises easy to cut with the router and the chisel, it meant that some of the tenons were on funny angles. And then just keep dry fitting it as you go, and then mark where the new holes need to be cut. And it really astounded me that it actually came together, and even without any glue it holds together, so I was pretty impressed. One thing I always forget to do, which is to actually measure the thing that you've got the thing on, because if that's not level, it doesn't make any difference. The last joint for the legs, and that was just a simple bridle joint that's going to hold the stretcher. So I'm using Gorilla Glue. I've never used it before, but it's expanding glue and it activates with water, so you need to wet all the joints before you apply the glue. Now this glue is super strong and really forgiving for any shoddy joinery, but it does expand and requires a bit of cleanup afterwards. Now I just want to make sure that these two are as level as possible, so just finishing off the top and making sure it's nice and flat. And that's the legs done, ready for finish. So now I can concentrate on the rest of the base, which is the stretcher, a couple of supports. But before we do that, I just want to epoxy the bottom of the feet. And that's because this table is going to be sat outside on gravel, so just to stop any kind of water ingress through the bottom of the legs. Now I had intended to go and build this actually upside down on the table in the shack, but again I was still doing coat after coat of finish, so I just thought I'm going to have to build this in the house. And again, instead of measuring, I'm just going to offer up the piece and then actually just scribe it for the bridle joint. Make a load of cuts with a circular saw, and then my favourite part of joinery. So with the stretcher done, I can actually offer up pieces like this, and there's no way I'd have been able to calculate or measure that without actually just offering up the real piece. Lastly, it's the diagonals, and these ended up being quite complicated just in terms of how the tenons were cut, but it was all principles that I'd learned cutting the other parts, so it wasn't too intimidating. With the corresponding mortises in the stretcher, that's the last of the joinery, and I can start the glue up. Now the slabs themselves might be heavy, but at least they were flat. This piece is really awkward. Now the only piece of hardware in the table is these 2 bolts which hold the legs onto the stretcher. And that's because this joint couldn't be glued without making the whole base as one piece, which would be absolutely impossible to move. And now I can finish the base. Again, sand till smooth. I left this a little bit rougher than the tabletop, just because it's got a much more rustic look and feel. And then the same gloss first, and then a matte final coat. Now, I know this table is going to move. It's essentially just a tree. But to help with any kind of warping, I'm just going to put some manga line in along the way. I don't know if this is overkill or underkill, given the size of the table. But just a bit of peace of mind for me, really. Also where the legs are going to attach, so it's kind of a bit of extra support on that stress point. Now I'm just going to make some slotted holes for the screws, so it will allow for like an inch movement either way for the table to expand and contract. And then just for belt and braces as well, I'm going to epoxy in these threaded inserts. Now the cardboard runway gets replaced with some dust sheets. I'm ready to get packed up in the van and shipped down south. The dog came to help me, and this is the first time we kind of lifted the table under pure human power. It's just really simple. Move it a little bit, take the supports out, put them in front, move it again, and just keep doing that till we get to the van.
Oh, that's slide is beauty. Whoa! Yes, pal.
I can get the rest of the table in, and then think about adding some supports to stop it moving around.
Cheers, pal. See you later. The name's not Pal. It's Al. Outside shack.
Oh, this is perfect. Oh, I'll do that, mate.
Excellent.
We're just outside, so fire out the space. Go, Mum!
Another music video. Good. Because you're under it, aren't you? Just
Load of randoms.
pick two, yeah. And just get out my mind. Other space for him or something. You there? No. Turn left a bit, left a bit. Sorry, lovely. Throwing it in those space. Turn left. In, out. Right, down. Pull it. Watch these stand now. Where we going?
Yep, done.
Boom.
Oh mate, that is an
Absolutely magnificent. Well done, lads. Well done, lads. Holy crap. That's in, it's dead level.
By the time
By
you
the
get to
time
the
you
end,
lift it isn't too far.
Can't remember the feet first.
we still pay for the electric, but then we get a nice tree
You like Blackpool Illuminations?
I don't want to wrap the tree.
around the outside
Tree's
kitchen.
coming down.
Yeah.
The outside
kitchen under the working kitchen.
The outside kitchen's not happening for years.
What? Why has that been
The
delayed?
inside kitchen's
Oh, right.
This is now fucking.
gonna be a lot less
I don't know
Yeah.
if you've seen the red kitchen inside.
It's
but
not that
that's gonna-
It's a very,
You're
very
Spurs fan,
fancy
mate.
kitchen.